I'm Matthew,
I'm Chandler.
and today we're going to be bringing you the Pac-12, and we're going to start with the North Division, and we're going to start with the champion Washington of that division last year. They were 10-4 and 7-2 in the Pac-12. Their offense was 89th with 26.4 points per game. Their defense was 5th with 16 points per game allowed. Returning production ranks 118th of 130 teams. And pretty much what that means is the amount of tackles, sacks, stuff like that, passing yards that you return, not just players, so actual stats. 5 years of recruiting, they're 21st in the country in that department. And we do 5 because of for obvious reasons, such as if a player gets hurt, they get a 5th year, or if they graduate, you usually get a 5th year instead of 4 years. Some of their key losses. They lost a lot of talent to the NFL. They lost Jake Browning, their quarterback. They also lost Myles Gaskin, their starting running back. They also lost Drew Sample, Ben Burkervin, and Ben Burkervin was the leading tackler in all of the NCAA last year and the 4th leading tackler in NCAA history for a year, behind Luke Kuechly in 2 of those years. So he's in pretty rare company with that. He had 176 total tackles last year, the 4th most ever. And he averaged 12.5 tackles per game, so that's a lot of tackles to replace per game. They also lost Taylor Rapp and Greg Gaines, their leader, 2 of their leaders on defense, Rapp at safety and Greg Gaines at nose tackle. Gaines led the team with 7.5 sacks and 4.5 tackles for loss. They also lose Byron Murphy, who's another key piece in the secondary, another NFL draft pick, to the Arizona Cardinals in the second round. He led the team with 4 interceptions, so that's a leader you're going to have to replace in the secondary, and that's going to be very hard to replace. They lost a lot on defense. They also lose 6 of their 7 top tacklers, other than cornerback Miles Bryant, who's supposed to step in and be another piece of what Washington's creating there. I mean, right now they're probably DBU the last 4 or 5 years. They've thrown a lot of people into the NFL, and they've all been pretty decent in the NFL, and I don't expect anything less from Byron Murphy and Taylor Rapp. They return Salvin Ahmed, who was their 2nd leading rusher last year, but he actually averaged more yards per carry than Myles Gaskin, averaged 5.8 yards per carry, and he had 7 touchdowns. So I don't expect much of a drop-off between Ahmed and Gaskin, to be honest with you. They also return Aaron Fuller, who led them in receiving yards with 874 and 58 receptions as well. They also get back Ty Jones, who was their leading wide receiver in touchdowns with 7. They also get back Trey Adams, who at the beginning of last year was projected to be a first-round pick, but he suffered a back injury and had to have surgery on that back. But he'll be back this year fully healthy and ready to go. They returned 4 out of 5 offensive linemen there as well, so that's a big piece. They did lose right tackle, though, Caleb McGarry, who was drafted by the Atlanta Falcons in the first round of the NFL draft. But they have Jared Hilbers, who's filled in at left tackle for Trey Adams last year, and he'll slide over to right tackle this year while Trey Adams comes back and plays left tackle. And then you get quarterback Jacob Eason, who at the time when he was coming into college football, he came in with Georgia, and he was the second quarterback in the class of 2015. He was 2nd-ranked quarterback, and he's from Washington. That's why he went back. And I think that's actually an upgrade over Jake Browning. I think Eason has higher upside than Browning. He's got a bigger arm. I think he'll probably make more mistakes, but you also throw a lot more touchdowns and probably have a lot bigger plays in the passing game. I have Washington going 11-1 this year with their only loss at Stanford. I had to pick a loss. I very rarely will choose a team to go 12-0. I just think it's too hard. There aren't many teams that do it, and every team other than about Alabama and Clemson loses a game they're not supposed to. And I would say Washington probably isn't supposed to lose to Stanford, even if it is on the road. Their schedule breaks down like this. They start out with Eastern Washington in Husky Stadium. Then they come back to Husky Stadium versus California. They're at Husky Stadium again for Hawaii. So 3 straight games at their home stadium. So that's nice to start out. Then they go on the road to BYU. Then they play USC at home again. Then this is where I see the loss. I see the loss at Stanford. I just think Stanford's going to be a decent team this year. I wouldn't put them on course with Washington, but like I said, I'm not going to pick a team to go 12-0 very often. And I just see I don't see Washington as one of those teams I would take to go 12-0 this year. Then they're at Arizona. Then they play Oregon at home. If that was on the road, I probably would have picked the loss there. But I feel at home they have enough to get it done. Especially with Oregon, I feel like they're on the verge, but they're not there yet with Washington. Chris Peterson's just too good of a coach. I don't know about the head coach at Oregon yet. Then they have a bye week, and then they're at home again versus Utah. If that bye week wasn't there and they had both those games, even if they were at home, I'd pick one of them. One of those games I think would be a loss. They play Oregon State, then they're off again, and then they play at Colorado and Washington State. So I have them at 11-1, like I said, and they only lost to Stanford.
See, I don't know how I feel about this because you're looking at a team that was more talented last year, but they also lost 4 games last year. So to project them to only lose a game this year is a little itchy in my opinion. But the schedule-wise, it sets up really well for them because they play, 5 ranked teams, and basically 4 of the 5 ranked teams at home, so that's real nice for them. And I also believe they'll lose that game at Stanford, but I'm also looking at a game week 4. I mean, I don't know. I haven't really looked into BYU, so I don't know how good BYU is supposed to be at this moment, but anytime you have to go and play at BYU, that can always be a tricky game, especially right before they play USC, so that could be kind of like a trap game almost for them, so we'll see what happens with that one. But I'm going to project they're going to go 10-2 this year. I'll say 10-2. I believe they will lose 2 games. I believe they'll lose that Stanford game. And then they got back-to-back weeks where they get Oregon and then they get Utah. And I believe they'll lose. I don't know which one of those games, but they'll lose one of those 2 and end up going 10-2.
I could easily see a loss there between those 2 teams. I just feel like with the bye week in between, it's going to be a huge advantage for them, and neither of those teams have a bye week before Washington, so that's why I predict Washington to go 11-1. Moving on, I'm going to Mike Leach's team, another Washington team, Washington State. They went 11-2 last year, 7-2 in the Pac12. They were 15th in offense with 37.5 points per game. Their defense was 42nd, which is much improved for a Mike Leach team. They usually don't play much defense with him at head coach, but they played some last year with only allowed 23.3 points per game. They ranked 77th in returning production out of 130 teams, and their 5-year recruiting average is 50th. Key losses, Gardner Minshew. He played very well last year, over 4,500 yards passing, and that was unexpected, let's be honest here. Came from Eastern Carolina. He was okay there, wasn't great. He wanted to become a coach. He still wants to become a coach, I believe. I know he's in the NFL right now, but I think that's where his heart is coaching. And he was thinking about transferring to Alabama, and then Mike Leach gave him a call and said, hey, we need a quarterback out here. I think he'd be pretty decent. Well, guess what? He did. He turned out to be a pretty good quarterback for them. So that's going to be a pretty big loss. They also lose James Williams, who had over 1,100 yards rushing. And it was kind of weird. He had 613 receiving yards and 560 rushing yards. So he had more receiving yards than rushing yards last year. But he had 16 touchdowns, so that's a lot of touchdowns to replace. They also lost Peyton Pellier, their leading tackler, with 97 tackles. And he actually played 6 years at Washington State. And he's a 4th-generation player from Washington State. He had a lot of people come before him and his family play there too. He also had 10.5 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks, tied with the lead for Washington State in both of those categories. They also lose safety Jalen Thompson. He was 4th in the tackles. He's in the NFL now. And they also lose their other safety, Hunter Dale, who's also looking for a job in the NFL. He's a free agent, actually. And they lose a big key off their offensive lineman. They lose tackle Andre Dilliard, who was a first-round pick for the Eagles. I think he's a replacement for Jason Peters. I think he's that good. He's very talented. Offensive tackle, it's going to be hard to replace him, especially at a place like Washington State where they don't recruit very well. They don't recruit elite talent. But they do get a couple key returning players. Max Brogy, their 2nd leading rusher, and he was honorable mention for Pac12 at the beginning of this year. So I think he'll be a pretty good running back, and he'll do a decent job replacing James Williams. 1,000+ yards from scrimmage is hard to replace, especially 613 receiving from a running back. That's going to be very hard to replace. They lose Jahad Woods. He was 2nd in tackles last year, and they returned Jahad Woods, sorry. He was 2nd in tackles last year, and he was on the Pac-12 honorable mentions list also. They also bring back their 3 best receivers, including Desmond Patton, Patman, who led the team in receptions with 806, or led the team in yards with 816, and yards per catch with 13.4. They returned 4 out of the 5 starting O-line, including Abraham Lucas, who was started as a redshirt freshman last year, and he's a redshirt sophomore this year, and he did a pretty good job last year, so you expect him to get better. But like I said, the one guy they did lose was a first-round NFL pick, so that's going to be very hard to replace. Also at quarterback, you're looking between 2 guys right now. It's quarterback Anthony Gordon. He's a redshirt senior, and another senior transfer, Gage Gubrud, almost 10,000 yards at Washington State and 87 touchdowns, or Eastern Washington, 87 touchdowns there as well. He transferred from Eastern Washington to Washington State. And right now, I think it's just his job to lose. He's a pretty good quarterback. He would have had over 100, probably 15 touchdown passes at Eastern Washington if he didn't decide to transfer and sit out the rest of the year last year. So right now, I think Mike Leake will work his magic with him just like he did with Gardner Minshew. And I think, honestly, if you put anyone in this system, they're going to throw for at least 3,500 yards. It's that type of air raid system. You throw the ball a lot. I mean, anyone I can think of has thrown for at least over 3,000 yards that Mike Leach has ever had, whether it's been at Texas Tech or Washington State. He always has a decent offense. He's a very creative offensive side, and I think they'll be good enough on offense to do well. Not as good as last year. I have them at 7-5 and 5-4 in the Pac-12, so pretty big downgrade there. 7-5, and their first games are versus New Mexico State, Northern Colorado, so that should be 2 wins. Then they have Houston. I actually have them losing that game to Houston. I just feel like Houston has De'Aaron King at quarterback. He's a very good quarterback, and it's in Houston, NRG Stadium, so it's not a home game for Houston, but it's a home game for Houston. They play UCLA at home, but I actually have UCLA winning that game. Then they're at Utah. That's a loss. They're off. I have them beating Arizona State, Colorado, Cal, Stanford, and Oregon State after that. They kind of just beat up on the teams they're supposed to beat up and lose to the teams they're supposed to lose to. I mean, they could be better than 7-5. I could see 8-4, but I think that's best case scenario. They could easily be 6-6 also, but I'll have them at 7-5.
7-5, that's just, in my opinion, disrespectful to a team like Washington State coming off the year they had. I know they lost the quarterback, Minshew, but I think they're actually going to have a decent year. I do agree they'll lose to Houston on the road. That's basically a given, but I believe they'll beat UCLA. And then that Utah game, that'll be an interesting game, but I think they'll lose that one also. And then that Arizona State game, they'll win the game against Colorado. And I believe they'll beat Stanford too. I think they'll lose 4 games though, so it's not really much better than 7-5, I guess. So I guess a disrespectful comment wasn't really needed, but still, anyways, I think they'll lose to Washington, Oregon, Houston, and then that game on the road against Utah.
Okay, next up we have Stanford. They went 9-4 last year, 6-3 in the Pac-12. Their offense was 73rd in the country with 28.4 points per game. Their defense was 38th with 22.9 points per game, and they ranked 108th out of 130 in returning production. The recruiting was actually a lot higher than I thought it would be because of not just who they recruit, but for academic purposes, it's hard to get the type of player you want in there. And they don't actually hand out that many scholarships. They are very particular of who they want to bring in for obvious reasons. Key losses, Bryce Love, obviously, he's a great player, was second in Heisman 2 years ago. But last year, he tore his ACL, had a bunch of other injuries. He only had 739 yards rushing last year and 4.5 yards per carry, so a really big down year. I mean, like I said, his Heisman year where he came in second place, he had 2,118 yards and 8.1 yards per carry, so almost double the yards per carry that he had last year. They also lose J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, the huge play threat on the outside, now with the Philadelphia Eagles. He has 63 receptions for 1,059 yards, which is 16.8 yards per catch. So you're losing a big deep threat on the outside, and a guy that's hard to replace at a place like Stanford. He also had 14 touchdowns. And then at tight end, Caden Smith, he was drafted to the NFL. He's much more of a blocker than he was a pass catcher, though. Only had 635 receiving yards. They also lose linebacker Bobby Okery. He had 182 total tackles the last 2 years, so that's a lot of production you're losing in the last 2 years. They also lose linebacker Sean Barton, 91 total tackles. He was the second leading tackler, so you lose your two linebackers who are leaders and great tacklers. So that's going to be hard to replace. And they also lose starting cornerback Elijah Holder, who was an honorable mention on the Pac-12 All-Conference team last year. And he was kind of their veteran back there. He was kind of their shutdown corner. But they do have a very good cornerback coming in, or returning actually, and Paulison Adipo. He led the team with 4 interceptions, and he also led them with passes defended with 17, which is a lot. But that's also because he got the ball thrown his way a lot because Elijah Holder was a very good player. All 5 O-line starters are back, including Walker Little, who right now is going to be a top 10 pick. He's locked in. If he stays healthy, he's a top 10 pick, no doubt. He could even vie for that number 1 spot if it's a team looking for an offensive tackle. He's very good. He was very highly rated coming out of high school. He's great now. He's a lock there unless he gets hurt. They also returned quarterback KJ Costello, who threw for over 3,500 yards and 29 touchdowns. So that's a big key. I mean, you get pretty much your whole starting, or you do get all 5 starting linemen back, and you get a veteran quarterback. So that's a big key for them moving along this year. If those guys can be great, I think this team has a chance to be pretty good. They return Cameron Scarlett, who is their second leading rusher with 330 yards on 4.2 yards per carry and 109 yards receiving. So he's going to have to step up for Bryce Love, and he played pretty well when Bryce Love was out for about most of the year last year. I do have Stanford at 8-4 with wins at. They have a pretty tough schedule starting off, but I have wins versus Northwestern, UCF, and that UCF game Mackenzie Milton was playing, or even Darryl Mack. I would probably take UCF. They also beat Oregon State, Washington, UCLA, Arizona, Colorado, and Cal. And just running through their schedule, like I said, Northwestern to start out with, then they go at USC, and then at UCF. I think they split between USC and UCF. I don't think they beat both of them. I have them beating UCF only because Brandon Wimbush is the quarterback, and I don't trust him very much. Then they go back home versus Oregon. Then they're on the road again at Oregon State. They play Washington at home. Then they're off. They play UCLA, Arizona at home. Then they're off again. And they play at Colorado, at Washington State. And then they finish off the season at home with Stanford and Notre Dame. So it's a pretty difficult schedule. They always seem to schedule some pretty hard out-of-conference games. And I have them at 8-4.
I think Stanford is going to go 9-3 this year. Like he said, they basically, to start the season, they have basically a schedule from hell, basically. Look who they got to start out with. Northwestern, which, they went to the Big Ten Championship last year. Now they got the transfer quarterback, so where is it from?
Hunter Johnson. He's from Clemson. He's a 5-star recruit, so he's a really good player.
Yeah, he's a really good player. So I don't think Northwestern, that's not really a cupcake game. That'll be a difficult game. I think they'll win that game, and then, like he said, I believe they'll split that 2 games between USC and UCF. But I actually have them losing to USC. And then, let me take that back. I actually have them winning against USC and actually losing to UCF on the road because, in my opinion, UCF, I don't think Brandon Wimbush is going to be the starting quarterback. I know right now he is, but by the time week 3 comes, I don't think he will be. And I think UCF is going to try to look for revenge after the loss to LSU last year. So they'll come out motivated, and I think they'll get that win. And then Stanford versus Oregon. I think Stanford will actually lose that game also. And then Actually, I take that back. I think they'll win that game, then they'll lose to Washington, and then they'll lose to Washington State. But then I have an upset pick. I think they will beat Notre Dame that last game of the season. I'm not a big Notre Dame guy. I always see Notre Dame choking, and I think last game of the season, I think that's going to have big implications for Notre Dame in terms of college football playoff, and Stanford will play the spoiler in that game.
That could happen, and like he said, UCF and USC, that's a coin toss. But they're not winning both those games. They'll lose one of those games, and I have them losing versus UCF, and he has them losing, or I have them beating UCF, and then he has them beating USC.
You have them losing to Oregon, don't you?
Yeah. Yes.
See, actually, I have them winning the Oregon game also. I don't think they're going to lose back-to-back games. I think they're too talented to go, even though, because especially since that game, they come back and play that game at Stanford, so.
Okay, the next team I've got is Oregon, and they wouldn't be here unless they choked that game totally last year versus Stanford. They would have finished 3rd, but unfortunately they did, and they're in 4th here. They were 25th in offense with 34.8 points per game. Their defense ranked 48th with 25.4 points per game. Returning production was 32nd out of 130, so they return a lot of key pieces. Their 5-year recruiting average is 16th, which is very high. I thought that'd be a little bit lower. I didn't think much lower, maybe in the 20s. Key losses, they lose their do-it-all wide receiver Dylan Mitchell with 75 receptions, 1,184 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Their next closest wide receiver had 433 yards and 38 receptions and only 5 touchdowns. So someone's going to have to step up because Dylan Mitchell was the one guy you could rely on, third down, give it to him, go deep, give it to him. Whatever you needed him to do, you could give it to him and he'd make it work. They also lose Justin Hollins, who's an outside linebacker and plays currently for my Denver Broncos. He led the team in sacks with 6.5 sacks and 14.5 tackles for loss. So he's a big player for them last year, and he's making noise in the NFL right now in the preseason. They also lose their third leading tackler in Jalen Jelks, he was also second in tackles for loss. He's in the NFL as well. They also lose cornerback Hugo Amandi, their best cornerback. He was drafted in the 4th round by Seattle, so that's a big loss. Anytime you lose NFL players, that's going to be a loss, and all 4 of those guys are in the NFL right now, so those are 4 big losses. But they do have a lot returning, and they also brought in the 7th best recruiting class last year, including the 2nd best recruit in the country, Kayvon Thibodeau, defensive end. He's going to be a beast. Probably start right away. Key returning, like I said, Justin Herbert. Great player. The only problem I have with him, 59.1 completion percentage. The year before, he had the 67% completion percentage. And he's going to have to get back to somewhere around there. I wouldn't say 67 because that's elite. If he can get down or up to somewhere around 63, 64, I think that'll be fine. But he does need to take a step in being better with the ball and putting the ball in a better position so his wide receivers can catch it. Both running backs, Travis Dye and C.J. Verdell, who combined for over 1,700 yards, are back. Linebacker Troy Dye, leading tackler, 109 total tackles, 40 more than the next guy. So he's key, especially with Hollins and Jelks leaving. He's their key player on defense and probably their leader on defense. All 5 O linemen return, and this is crazy. 4 out of the 5 linemen are all redshirt seniors. This offensive line is going to be very good. It might be the best in the country. Georgia and Oregon probably have the best 2 offensive lines in the country. And Oregon may be number 1. I don't know. We'll have to see. But 4 out of 5 is pretty crazy for all redshirt seniors, other than their left tackle, who's a sophomore. But if he's a sophomore and he's playing left tackle, he can't be too bad. They also get transfer wide receiver Jawan Johnson from Penn State, but he only had 25 receptions for 352 yards last year. He's going to have to step up. Like I said, someone's going to have to step up because they lost Dylan Mitchell, and maybe it can be him. He was highly recruited coming out of high school, chose Penn State. Now he decides to move on. Hopefully Justin Herbert can find him because he needs some help. They need some help at wide receiver. Even with all that, like I said, they return a lot. I think they're going to have a little bit of issues on the outside at wide receiver, but I think they'll find a way. Especially with the offensive line they have, if you can protect a guy for 45 seconds, anyone can get open. I have them at 11-1. I have wins versus everyone except Washington. I just think in Justin Herbert's final season, they're going to step up and be pretty good. They start out versus Auburn. And I think this game, it's a neutral site game, Arlington, Texas, Dallas Cowboys Stadium. The Pac-12 needs to step up. They got embarrassed last year. I think Auburn finished 6th or 7th in the SEC, and Washington was 1 in the Pac-12, and they got beat. You got to win that game. If you're the best team in your conference, you got to beat someone in the middle of another conference. You just have to. They play Nevada, Montana. Those should be 2 easy wins. Then they play at Stanford. They get an off week. They play at home versus California, Colorado. Then they're at Washington. That's the game I see them losing. Then they're at home versus Washington State, on the road versus USC. They're off again. They play Arizona on the road, or Arizona at home, and then Arizona State on the road, and then Oregon State at home. They've lost to, I think, an Arizona team every year the last 3 or 4 years. They've lost to one of them. So you have to buck that trend this year. You have to beat both those teams because I don't think they're going to be very good this year. So I have them at 11-1, like I said, and a loss at Washington.
I disagree. SEC, Pac-12 is not being the SEC. I don't care, especially at a neutral site. Maybe if it was in Eugene, but it's not in Eugene. It's in Arlington. I think Auburn, with it being in Arlington, will actually have the home field advantage still because Auburn fans, they travel pretty well. Auburn's going to win that football game. Pac-12's not ready to make a win like that. I actually have them losing to Washington, 2 on the road, but you know what? No one's picked any upsets. It's time for a little upset, a little action, a little fun. I have them losing to Arizona State the second to last game of the season. I think that'll be a tricky game, and I have Oregon going 9-3.
Okay, like I said, 11-1. He has 9-3, so we disagree on that. Next up is California, and this is where we get to the garbage of the Pac-12 because let me tell you, neither of these last teams are very good. Cal was 7-6 last year, and it's only going to get worse. Let me tell you, they're ranked 116th in the country on defense with 20 or on offense with 21.5 points per game. They're very good on defense, actually, with 22nd with 20.4 points per game. Returning production is 52nd in the country, and the recruiting average over the last 5 years is 44th. Key losses: they lose their captain, running back Patrick Laird, 961 rushing yards, but he only averaged 4.3 yards per carry, so he was reliable, but he didn't bust one open. He wasn't a big play running back. They also lose wide receiver Vic Wharton. He was a leading receiver with 50 receptions and 502 yards. They also lose their second leading wide receiver, Maurice Ways. And they also lose their second leading tackler, Justin Kunazik, with 143 total tackles. And he was a captain on defense. So you lose your captain on offense and defense. That's a lot of veteran leadership leaving, especially off a really bad team. Key returning is Chase Garbers. He only threw for 1,500 yards last year with 14 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. California started out with 4 quarterbacks played last year, and their starter actually got hurt. What I heard was in their training camp, broke his thumb, came in. Ross Bowers, I believe his name is. He came in and played the first half of their first game, and then he got pulled and never saw the light of day after that. So I don't know if that's true or they just decided to pull him and use that as an excuse. And like I said, Chase Garbers wasn't that good last year. Only 1,500 yards passing and 14 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. And the 4 quarterbacks that played had a combined total of 16 touchdowns and 20 interceptions. So unless that gets dramatically better, this team's not going to be very good. Linebacker Evan Weaver, their leading tackler, does come back with 155 tackles. They also get their leader in sacks back with Luck Bequette. And 3 of the 5 O-linemen return for California. So that's a little bit upside there, a little bit of veteran leadership on the offensive line. But unless the quarterback position gets better, this team's not going to be very good. The backup to Chase Garbers last year, so actually their third string, and at the beginning of the season was second string. Well, they made a mistake because he finished the season with 2 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. So hopefully he never gets to see the field again. I have them at 3-9. I just don't think they're going to be very good. I have their wins versus UC Davis, North Texas, and they could lose that game because Mason Fine is one of the top 10 quarterbacks in college football. He's that good. He's a very good quarterback for North Texas. And I also have them beating Oregon State. They start out the season, like I said, UC Davis. Then they're at Washington. They have no chance to win that game. There's 0% chance that's happening. They play North Texas at home. Then they go on the road at Ole Miss. That could get ugly as well. They play Arizona State at home. They're at Eugene versus Oregon. They're off. Then they play Oregon State like you need 2 weeks to prepare for that garbage team. Then they're actually that's at home. Then they play at Utah. Then they're off again. They play Washington State at home, USC at home. They're at Stanford and then at UCLA. So I have them at 3-9, worse than last year. I just see it like that because they don't have a quarterback, and the quarterback they do have isn't very good.
Basically going along the same line. I don't think Cal's going to be that good either. I think one of the bottom feeders in the Pac-12, them and Oregon State. So I think, you know what, I'll throw a win in there for them. I'll let them go 4-8 just for the heck of it. But I'm not seeing much. I don't think they'll make a bowl game like they did last year. And like you said, they'll beat UC Davis. But that North Texas game, that could be a toughie. So if they can't get that win, then you might as well just cancel the season for Cal and basically hang up the jerseys because it's not getting much better than that. And then Oregon State, that should be a win, hopefully.
Hey, they get USC at home, so that's a good thing. Maybe they can win that.
I was thinking that too. I saw that they got USC at home, and who knows if USC is coming into that game struggling.
Clay Helton could be fired at that point if they go downhill.
He might be gone. So yeah, I say they'll go 4-8. So we'll see what happens.
And then probably the worst Power 5 team there is, Oregon State. 2-10 last year, 1-8 in the Pac-12. Their offense ranked 92nd in the country with 26.1 points per game. And then get this. 129th ranked defense, 45.7 points per game. That's not going to win many ball games. In fact, it only won you 2, and it's only going to get worse this year. Returning production is 23rd. Their 5-year recruiting average is 61st. Their key losses are receiver Timmy Hernandez. He led them in yards and receptions. They do have a lot returning, but it doesn't matter because this team just isn't very good. Their key returning is quarterback Jake Luton. He threw 10 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. They also had another quarterback play, Connor Blount, and he actually bowed out and transferred to Eastern Washington. So he's no longer there. So the job is fully on Jake Luton. They return. This is actually the bright spot. Jamar Jefferson, he's a very good player. Sad that he has to waste away there. 1,380 yards rushing, 5.8 yards per carry, and 12 touchdowns. He's a good player. It sucks that he has to be on this bad of a team. Wide receiver Isaiah Hodgins, he had 59 receptions, 876 yards, and 5 touchdowns. They also returned Jalen Moore, their leading tackler, with 101 total tackles. They returned, this is crazy, 10 of their top 10 leading tacklers. All of them are back, and 4 out of the 5 starting offensive linemen. So you return a lot of people and a lot of production, but you weren't very good last year. So unless they get a lot better, you're probably not going to be very good this year. But you did bring in a new defensive coordinator, Tim Tibesar from Wisconsin. He was their outside linebackers coach to help with the defense. Even if they get 10% better, I mean, that still makes them in the 110 to 115 range. So, I mean, I don't expect much. I have them at 1-11, and their only win is versus Cal Poly. They could have two wins, though. Their schedule is not very difficult. They play Oklahoma State. I don't see a win there, even though it is at home. Then they have to fly out to the islands, play the Rainbow Warriors. Cole McDonald will probably throw for about 700 yards versus their defense. They play Cal Poly at home, then they're off. They play Stanford at home, UCLA on the road, Utah at home, California on the road, Arizona on the road, Washington at home, Arizona State at home, Washington State on the road, Oregon on the road. So pretty much all of their tough games are on the road other than Utah and Washington. So actually splitting your tough games. But it doesn't matter. This team's bad. You could play in the Walmart parking lot and you'd still lose.
2017, Oregon State, 1 win. 2018, 2 wins. And 2019, 3 wins. We're bumping it up 1 a year right here, boys. So I think they'll beat Cal Poly, of course. And then the Hawaii game, which I think, who knows, Hawaii might just run them out of town, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'll say Oregon State wins that game. And then I believe they'll beat either one of the Arizona teams, either Arizona State or Arizona, so that's how they'll get their 3 wins, and they'll finish the season going 3-9.
Man, he really dug for those wins because I just don't see it.
I might as well. I mean, they've been improving 1 win at a time. Might as well get 3 this year.
So in 10 years will be,
10 years?
11 and
This team's not going to lose a game in 10 years.
Okay, that will do it for the North, and he's got the South.